Our very first speaker this morning is Brandon Murdoch, Partner Engineer of the Identity Division of Microsoft, and also the lovely Pamela Dingle from Microsoft as well. So finally, let's give our crew here a warm round of applause.
Kia ora. So thank you for that welcome. Yesterday we heard from several speakers about digital capture. I think Kashmir summed it up beautifully when she talked about the digital cage. We don't live in digital living rooms. We don't even have digital huts, virtual places we can call our own. Instead, merchants and services control and store our content and history, often using it as they please. This content is what we are as digital beings, aspects of our identity, and we don't own it. Don't have any place to keep it, and don't control it. We lack a basic digital shelter that offers the fundamental privacy afforded by a home. But this can change. We believe a new idea is on the march. Each of us gets a digital identity in the full sense that we can own and control. Through such an identity, we can tie together all our content, and history now scattered throughout the web, creating a digital abode. Here's how we think it works. When we visit modern people-centered merchants and services, we decide what aspects of our identity we want to share and for what purposes. We select an identifier from our digital wallet, stored securely on our phones and PCs. We present this identifier to the service so it can recognize and contact us. From that point on, it has permission to come to our digital abode and access and save data and content and history there under our control. Just a few years ago, we would have said all this couldn't be done. This new model couldn't possibly work. But now decentralized cloud technology means that an individual's digital abode can be just as resilient, secure, and durable as any database an enterprise could run on premises or in the cloud. Such resilient technology means that adoption and self-owned identity and data can eliminate many of the privacy and security problems of the current web. After all, most of Rose's engineers tried to compensate for the defects in the web that was, well, structurally upside down, with people's identity and data under the control of others. But on the web, the people who run the websites call the shots. These are the enterprises. So whether we as individuals want to turn the web the right way up, it is down to the enterprises, and an important question as to whether they want to change. So today I'll talk about what we've been hearing from enterprises. Our sample isn't random. It consists of enterprises trying out and adopting the technology. We're amazed at the numbers and the sophistication of what they're attempting to do. I've never seen so much excitement for a new emerging technology. We can't share their plans, but we can recount the big story that comes out of the conversations that we're having. The essence is that enterprises need change too. Their interest in decentralized identity comes from a set of trends that have been building for years. Each trend impacts the others, resulting in what we can only call a surge. The power of this surge has created an unprecedented willingness in enterprises to rethink business models and try new things. So let's tease apart the underlying trends. The enterprise is now about externals. It has more so customers and partners are seen as being just as important and key as the employees within its walls. The modern company is an enterprise of stakeholders: managers, employees, distributors, suppliers, partners, investors, and most of all, customers. While companies have already created digital environments for their employees, almost none have created a true digital environment for their customers and other stakeholders. CXOs see that surviving new threats and benefiting from new opportunities requires that they create deep and lasting digital relationships with these stakeholders. They see success demanding new digital channels that let them collaborate with everyone, not just stakeholders with big IT departments, but everyone, big and small. We all know that enterprises have been striving to engage with customers through data. We've seen several conversations this week about that, and we now understand the scale of that. They've put in place systems to retain their customers' personal information and credit card numbers. They remember what their customers are doing. They track them on the web. They have joined Byzantium marketing networks that track customers and report back continually. I think that became very apparent in the digital capture speak. Some purchase credit profiles and demographic information. All this is outside of our control and outside of our view. No doubt this data can be helpful to build better services. Yet the culling of this data is purely voyeuristic, not the deep digital relationship that the goal of digital transformation needs. Worse, the more personal data that companies hoard and enterprises build, it puts them at risk of data breaches. Daily data breaches are a constant reminder to CXOs that the stash of customer PII is the greater risk to the very digital relationships central to their mission. Thus, enterprises increasingly understand that while the need for personal data is essential, it is currently representing a toxic asset. This is compounded by government regulation. Many enterprises reveal that their fancy web presence is backed by complex systems that are acquired over time and built up across multiple vendors. Lots of pieces of unknowns come together to provide this functionality, making it impossible to locate or understand and rule out software vulnerabilities. Many too express that the fear, in spite of everything they're doing to comply with GDPR and to protect against vulnerabilities, they're one USB stick away from a breach and the resulting massive fines. They are super motivated to remove these risks and these liabilities while trying to improve customer allegiance. People live with these fears and responsibilities, and when they discover decentralized identity, see that when the customer, instead of the enterprise, owns and controls the data, many of these liabilities are greatly reduced. This we see as a major motivator for companies to adopt this new model and explore decentralized identity and this decentralized world as we see it. This puts people at the heart of the value exchange as data controllers. People are in the loop when granting access to the data and can contribute to their defense and the ultimate data controllers. The massive centralized data breaches that tarnish a brand, attract retribution, are mitigated. Another common benefit motivating enterprises is this describing and seeing the decentralized identity as a new channel. Those working on these new business models see this as the best channel yet for building customer relationships, and they offer 4 reasons for this. They get secure authentication that removes friction and removes the security and privacy risks. They benefit from the ability to store some or all PII in an environment in a store that is under the user's control. That reduces their liability. They can share the data and history with the customer, sending notifications across devices the moment a transaction occurs, providing unimagined convenience and responsiveness. The customer can respond within the channel. This is no longer a voyeuristic relationship of surveillance, it is a real ongoing interaction with their customers. Today, enterprises struggle to interact with all their stakeholders. Stovepiped management systems are emerging for B2B, B2C, and IoT. They don't connect seamlessly with each other and don't work with existing enterprise IT seamlessly. It's all too complicated, making it hard to collaborate and across boundaries with small players who actually have no IT or IT skills. In the new world we are describing, stovepipes go away. Each stakeholder, regardless of size, role, uses exactly the same technology, the identity they own. Everyone can connect and collaborate with everyone. When identity is self-owned and controlled, How can enterprises distinguish between an employee, a customer, what role they're performing, or what are their entitlements? Everyone can acquire and store badges of different types that indicate who they work for, the training they have received, their citizenship, their social affiliations, and anything else for which people want to create a badge. So just like in the physical world, when entering a work environment, an employee presents an employee badge. When accessing patient records, a doctor presents a medical badge, proving his entitlement. Suppliers present a badge for the company they work for. To travel, citizens present a passport badge. We see this new world mirroring the existing world and the current mental model that people have about badges and exchanges of information. This system of badges can do everything that current systems do, but more simply. The experience is closer to that of the physical world. Self-owned identities are a perfect mechanism for conveying verified credentials under the control of the user. Early adopter enterprises are intensely interested in benefiting from a system of badges and the corresponding networks of trust. The technology gives issuers of credentials and organizations who can benefit from them a way to build multilateral networks of trust in which the individual is fully empowered and in control. One early public example of a system of badges attesting to formal capabilities was an education pilot that would speed up job matching and employee portability. The issuance of these badges and validation that they are authentic presents the opportunity for early adopters to become important market leaders and to directly benefit from this new model. Concerns about whether consumers will be able to reliably manage their own data have been mitigated by proposals to use blockchain to provide the durable substrate for scalable, self-owned and controlled identity, just as has been done with cyber currencies. The blockchain frenzy has begun and propelled a lot of proof of concepts and a lot of interest in the space. The cloud has changed a lot of what we're seeing today. Merchants and services are now using services provided by the cloud. They leave the complexity to the cloud operators. And we as individuals can now do the same. We can now have technological parity with the operators of the present day web. This is leveling the playing field, and this is putting the right way up. Decentralized business models are realizing new value, even giving rise to new popular terms such as the gig economy. However, these models are only a step in the right direction. Decentralized identity is the key to unlocking the real value where users are in control and a fundamental part of the value exchange. So how do we go about driving this mass adoption of this new model? How do we create penetration? Well, standards and more so open standards are pivotal to talk about and to drive this forward. And my colleague here, Pam, who heads up our standards division at Microsoft, is going to talk about that.
Elevator music play. We are. Okay, I love it that this conference, having a cell phone doesn't break the social contract. And by the way, you have no idea how well behaved I was, because I was really considering just populating Slido with engineering jokes the whole time. There's still time. Well, let's just say that I'm a Canadian, I'm married to an Australian, and when I told him I was coming to New Zealand, he said, New Zealand is beautiful, the only problem is it's populated with New Zealanders. Now, if you were, I know, right, these Australians. Now, if you were, for example, to put a few humorous responses into the Slido that I could then use when I go home, I would be fine with that. And also all other questions, of course, for both of us. In case it isn't obvious from our introductions, Brandon is the engineering manager who is building our decentralized identity products. He is not knee-deep in it, he is neck-deep in it, and he knows how this stuff works and why it works and why it doesn't. So your questions can be very detailed, and we have the right people here to give you answers. And I will say that I only do identity standards at Microsoft, not all standards. So I can't help you with electricity or Kubernetes or any of the other amazing standards out there. You're welcome to ask the questions, though, and just watch the look on my face as I try to make something up, and I might do that. All right, so we've talked about a world, a nice world that's where people are shiny and smiling, and they can accomplish things in a different way, and in a way that's more satisfying to them as human beings, because they have more control. What does that actually mean in a real world? I'm going to try to show you how we think about this at Microsoft, and how we are not doing this alone, that we are part of an ecosystem, and that this whole crazy idea can only succeed because there are many people who have the same idea of how technology can collaborate and interoperate to give people both a better experience and possibly give them a new way to control who they are and what data they give to the enterprises and merchants that they interoperate with. All right, so I want to start talking about what happens today. What does our identity landscape look like today so that we know what we have to do to get where we want to go? So today, we have solved quite a number of problems. We have the ability today to do something that's really quite remarkable. We have discovered a cryptographically respectable, verifiable way to send information between two organizations across domains on the internet, right? Through the cloud, pick a buzzword, and we can communicate through it. It's sort of a modern miracle, really. Examples of this include single sign-on, if you're familiar with single sign-on, also known as federation. SAML is one of the standards that has been around for a long time, which is the security assertion markup language. And really what that is a way for two entities to talk to each other securely about a subject, right? We are the subjects when we log in. So we develop a strong relationship with one organization so that that organization can speak about us to somebody else. And that affords us advantages. It means we can make our relationships real. We can transact between businesses. We can, get to places without using a password at every single place. There's a number of great advantages. And the way that this happens today is standards. So these businesses don't want to develop proprietary connections to every other business on the cloud. It doesn't scale. It cannot scale. The way that we scale today and the way that businesses can literally have a many-to-many relationship is because every business can use the vendors they choose, the libraries they choose, the practices they choose, as long as they adhere to a standard like SAML or like OpenID Connect. So they get to choose how to interoperate, but because we have a standard that explains how the request is made and how the response comes back, it means that everything just works, despite the fact that it's a heterogeneous world that we're living in. So that's wonderful. We have these things called identity providers, which you might remember spoken about yesterday. And the identity provider will work together to send these authoritative statements back and forth. The question is now, what if we want to do something remarkable? What if we actually want to take away that requirement for an organization to speak on behalf of a user? What if what we want to do is have that user actually speak for themselves? Well, what does that take? Obviously, humans aren't very good at PKI. We can't exactly store cryptographic keys very well. I mean, we can barely store passwords, let alone long cryptographic keys. So we need help. We need some way for us to rise to the level where we can speak on par with a security paradigm that's high enough so that we can speak to computers and computers can speak to us. So I know you will be shocked to know that I believe standards are the way that this can possibly happen. What we hope to do and see is a world where an organization can use the same set of standards to talk to people as they today use to talk to other businesses. So we don't see this as a replacement, we see this as an expansion of how organizations can interact. Sometimes it makes sense to talk to other businesses about people. Sometimes it makes sense to talk directly to people. So great, we actually have a foundation today that we can build on for the future, right? Today, we already can tell you how to use a standard to establish a trust relationship between two entities. We know how to use public key infrastructure to secure that. We can use things like encryption and signing to be sure that there's confidentiality and integrity and availability. All of these things are known concepts that are solved today, which is wonderful. It means that we actually have, we're not starting from scratch. These organizations can already do a lot of these things. Great, we're halfway there. So what about the people? What can people do today to talk to computers? Well, we can type. We're really good at typing. We can get on that keyboard and we can enter our first name and we can enter our last name and we can enter our degrees and we can enter our banking information, and all of it today comes through the keyboard. And why is that? It's because the human-computer interface is the hardest problem in technology today. It is not easy for humans to interact in meaningful ways where large amounts of data or large amounts of complexity are involved. So in this sense, we are starting from scratch. There's very little in the way of existing mechanisms for users to just jump on that cryptographic bus and start talking in technical ways. Okay. Well, now we know what we have, and we think we know where we want to go. And we can form this gap analysis. So what do we think is important for the future? Well, we think that users themselves should be able to own and control their own data. And what does that mean? It means they have to be able to send and receive authoritative statements about themselves. Now, not all data that is about you is owned by you. For example, if you get a diploma from a university, then the university issues that diploma, right? That is data about you that you should be able to control, but you shouldn't necessarily be able to make up diplomas and send them off to various organizations. So there are important rules that still have to be maintained about how we send data back and forth. Number one, important. Number two, we have to be able to own our identity, and it has to stay with us. So we can't lose it. It can't be taken from us. It needs to be ours and ours only, under our control. And that, that poses problems as well as giving us advantages. We have to find a way to do that. Thirdly, we cannot ask every organization on the planet to completely retool everything about their business in order to talk to humans. We need to be able to give organizations an easily adoptable path to be able to interact in a cryptographic fashion with a human being. And then lastly, we need help as humans. We need help. We cannot be expected to be handed an incredibly nerdy paradigm and just to have everyone on this planet understand how to operate it. We need to know whether what we're doing is safe, whether what we're doing has consequences, ripple effects, whether what we're doing could be dangerous for our health, dangerous for our finances, dangerous to our privacy. So the only way that people get to represent themselves is if somehow we can actually help them to make good decisions. And this is a classic problem of privacy. How do you create a set of privacy tools that allows people to understand the consequences both of acting, but also of not acting? All right, so now we know what we have. We know what we don't have. We know where we want to go. So how are we going to get there? Well, we're going to start with existing standards, again, because we're trying to create an evolution. We're trying to create the maximum benefit with the minimum amount of interruption to the flow of business and transactions. So we believe that one of the ways, and one of the best ways in our opinion, that we can sort of start this evolution is a specification called OpenID Connect. The great thing about OpenID Connect is it's massively in use today. Most of the cloud platforms use it today. You're probably using OpenID Connect to log in and you don't even know it. So it is mature, it works for mobile, it works for web, it is extensible. And the other thing it has is something that has been colloquially called SIOP, S-I-O-P, self-issued OpenID provider. And that idea of that is now you no longer have to be a big fancy organization who has a web domain and a web property and a certificate authority and all of these things. You can actually be a self-issued provider. You can issue your own assertions. So it's a really great small addition to an existing gold standard. In addition to that, when all of OpenID Connect works, they send authoritative statements called ID tokens. Those ID tokens are a thing called Json Web Tokens. And a Json Web Token is very simple. It uses the JSON object format, right? In other words, curly brackets, not angle brackets. And it simply describes how you can send an object that can be encrypted or signed. So now we have a way to send cryptographically verifiable information about ourselves that is issued by ourselves. This is a pretty good start, right? All of this, the specifications exist today, so it's a question of implementation. That's not enough, because we really are moving into new territory. As Brandon said, we are looking at placing essentially our public keys on distributed ledgers and on the blockchain. And what that means is that you can discover it easily. It's durable, if not immutable. We don't want to get into the immutability debate here, although it would be very fun. It would take forever. So the great thing about a distributed ledger is that an individual can write one transaction to a ledger that they can use, in theory, in perpetuity as a root of authority and a root of trust. That doesn't happen with web domains. I don't know, how many of you here own a web domain? All right. How many of you have lost a web domain because you forgot to make the payment? You're right. So that's the problem. The problem with web domains, they're a perfectly acceptable way to anchor an identity, but they are not durable in the same way that an entry on the blockchain is. That's why we see promise in it. We are not looking at putting actual PII or identity information on a blockchain. We want to make that absolutely clear. What we do want to write to the blockchain is a simple trust document that says, if you want me to authenticate, you can verify my statements to you using this public key. So it's a simple binding between an identifier and a public key. So it's PKI, just without the I. So that's the exciting part about what we're talking about here. The two standards we're talking about are decentralized identifiers. So that is a specification in W3C that will allow you to bind your public key to your identifier. And another one called verifiable credentials, which essentially lets you anchor your authoritative statements, such as a JSON Web Token, to your decentralized identifier. So now we have this chain from a transaction on the blockchain that you own, containing a key, to an actual authoritative statement you can make, signed by that key. This is, we believe, the beginning of what's necessary for an actual, for a person to really become a cryptographic participant in an everyday way. Right. It's pretty exciting, in my opinion. So, wonderful. Let's assume this works. Let's assume that we can set up an organization that's willing to just add that little piece of code to accept self-issued authoritative statements based on identifiers that are anchored in a distributed ledger or blockchain. Really, we're sending very similar information. We're not changing necessarily the data model. We are still allowing users to talk about who they are and what they can do, what they're allowed to do, what credentials have been issued to them. The whole concept of badges that Brandon talked about are still valid. The difference is not necessarily the data flowing. The difference is who owns the data and who controls the data. So the data is now coming, for example, from your smartphone, rather than you having had to type it in or upload it to an identity provider. We think both models must exist and they must coexist. So we don't think this is a revolution where the world will, perform a complete somersault, but it changes the nature of what you want to send and what tools you have available to you. Now, all of this has been about cryptography and about authoritative statements and really about the computer-to-computer nature of an entity who is an individual interacting with a computer. However, it turns out you really have to care about the other side of that coin too. It doesn't work for humans unless you take into account the human. And so all of that cryptography is the easy part in many, many ways. It is a puzzle. It's just a puzzle that you're going to assemble, and you're going to get a picture at the end that is, like any technology, going to evolve over time. The other side of the coin is the human coin, and that side is not a puzzle. We don't know the end. It's a mystery. We're going to find out. It's a whodunit. And this whole room needs to participate in the question of how can humans best learn what it means to send cryptographic data to organizations, to each other. How do we do that safely? What do we hold back? What do we give? I mean, that's literally, this conference has been that discussion amplified, and it's wonderful to see. So please know that we recognize, as much as we know that you all recognize, that it's the human that is going to make or break this technology, not the fancy bits, not the standards. We need best practices for informed consent. We need best practices for being able to manage these badges. And we need a recognition also in our industry that today what we do is we find out who a person is in order to find out what they can do. And we'd like to work towards a future where we can find out what a person does, or what a person can do, or what a person holds, rather than having to identify in quite the same way the person before we start applying those kinds of entitlements. This is the hardest problem, and we recognize that. We hope that you can help us to find ways to empower people without completely making their eyes roll back in their head. Now, we are not the only people who are working on this. Thank heavens. None of you would want to use it if it was the case. There is a huge ecosystem of companies who also believe in this idea of having people own and control their own data. And so, we are part of a foundation called the Decentralized Identity Foundation. There are multiple other foundations in this ecosystem also. You've heard a lot about self-sovereign identity, for example, this week. All of these businesses see both business advantage and a better world in this idea that we can start having, enabling all of these human beings as cryptographic entities. So we are working together to create something that can interoperate at scale so that everyone gets to choose, the method by which they're going to store the data, the method by which they will send the data, the company that will represent them, and maybe there will be more than one, for every given person. So, we care about the data portability piece of it. We care about the idea that it has to be able to work everywhere. It can't, for example, only work on Windows hardware. So, it's a really interesting, fun space right now to dig in and play. And with that, I want to make sure we leave some time for Brandon. I'm really hoping when we put up Slido that there will be engineer jokes. So I'm just saying, it should happen. So Brandon, if you want to come up, I will leave you with our Twitter handles. We both love Twitter. We would love to see questions and engagement also on Twitter as well. So I don't know if we have to do something special to bring up Slido. Here we go. All right. It's time for the lightning round. Self-managed ID is all very neat in theory, but what happens when people lose their private key? ID gone. People are terrible at looking after their secrets. Yes, this is true. Guess what? It's true for everything. We have to get better at that. Account recovery for passwords is terrible as well. So yes, this is a huge problem to solve. It is a social problem as much as it is a technology problem. Did you want to add anything, Brandon?
So we have a large division called Microsoft Research, and we have some theories in this space. There are current paradigms where you see print off 12 words or store the QR code in a safe, and that works. It's not the most seamless and the best process, and we're exploring new ways of trying to do it. Over the next couple of months, there will be stuff blogged about it from the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and then we actually want to start to put out some of these theories there to say, here is a new way of trying to solve this. I see people smiling, some of the other questions coming up. So it's something we're actively looking at. We realize this is the Achilles heel of what we're trying to propose, and we think we have a solution. We know cryptographically we can make it work and we can recover private keys. But asking somebody to remember a 300-page document or 10,000 words is not going to work, so we're exploring.
Right. I did see the Australian joke go by. I can't wait to, I'll go find it after. Looks like it's gone off the screen. All right, so how is Microsoft integrating broader definitions of identity? This is required if you don't want to colonize people with more Western/USA definitions of ID.
Holy charge. So that's a great question, and we've been talking about this all week. That's the reason why we wanted to come to this conference. We want to see other people's views. And it is, we have this pejorative Western view of the world. We talk about China and Korea. Actually, they are very Western in the way they look at and process things. And coming and hearing the stories about the Maori, it's been quite enlightening, and I'm really excited to go back and actually start to talk to the diff community, but also talk internally about it. And attending these kind of conferences and be exposed to different views is, I think, fundamental to getting that right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've had several conversations this week that have taken my notion of how things work and just sort of twisted them 10 degrees. So it is really easy to make technical solutions to problems, and it's very hard to make human solutions to problems. However, we are at the start of this journey. So what we're hoping is that our ecosystem is global enough that these ideas, come in organically. We also have to work. Pardon me. We have to work to make sure they're also part of our stream. Sorry, it's up to you.
Okay, next one. Doesn't this run against Nigel's point that you can't leave it up to individuals to protect their privacy? Yeah, and that's, I think, what we as technologists need to solve. This is, we can't say, no, we have to live with the existing model because it actually makes it easier for individuals. As technologists, we have to figure out how do we help people change their mental model, embrace this new world, but actually give them the cues that Pamela was talking about, actually show them. And that's where we think things like machine learning and AI can come in. So when you're presenting a badge to a merchant that's asking you for your date of birth and several other things, your user agent, this kind of thing that acts on your behalf, might come and go, the last time you shared this to this type of entity, they didn't ask you for your date of birth. Do you really want to do this? The consequence of doing it. So that's where we think technology can actually help and start to provide and act on behalf of the user, not the enterprises.
Absolutely. And we're actually, I believe, this is more my personal opinion, I believe we're in a hole right now. We are, as human beings, working with systems that are becoming more and more complex. So the complexity is rising. Our capability of understanding these abstract concepts is staying the same. So regardless of whether this thing works, regardless of where we go with decentralized identity, we actually have to innovate to move forward. We will hit a point where everything is so complicated that nobody understands what to do next. So that piece, that innovation, has to come no matter what.
And one of the things we talked to, as we talked to the engineering teams, trying to explain what they need to be doing, how they need to be thinking, and it was this point about evolution rather than revolution, and that evolution is important for users. We know technically now we can go from A to Z, but users can't make that leap, and we're going to have to take them A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, maybe all the letters in the alphabet on that journey to help them change their mental model and to adopt this new world. And that's not a 1 year, 2 year, this is a 5, 10, 15, 20-year journey. If we truly believe we're building a new substrate, it's going to take a long time for that to...
Sorry, I'm laughing at the Australian joke. My husband's going to be so mad at me. I can't wait.
I'll let you do
Oh my gosh.
You can take on the FIDO one.
I will talk about the FIDO one Absolutely. But I think the other one I'd love to address first, because we are out of time, and so we could get caned off the stage at any point, is how is Microsoft integrating broader definition? Oh, wait, that isn't the right one. How can this model work with real choice for people who are currently marginalized? Will they become even more marginalized? Well, there are a number of companies in our foundation who deeply, deeply care exactly about that area. And so you will get different answers from different people. We hope that the ability to write to distributed ledger is something that could, for example, still work in third world countries because of the cost, that the cost is better. I'm not the best person to talk about the unbanked or refugees, but they are heavily debated use cases in this community. So, I hope that, in fact, if you were to go online, you could look up work by a guy named Christopher Allen. He talks about the principles of self-sovereign identity, and that is a very strong principle in that community. Now, caring about it and solving it are different things, but it won't be for lack of trying. We'll say that much. We may have to go. Do we?
Yep.
Are we? All right.
We've got the nod.
We've got the nod. We have to leave, but I can't wait to go read all these jokes, and thank you for the great questions and for making us think. Appreciate it.